Today we're looking at 3 caving stories that went completely off the rails. The first one involves a sequence of events so unlikely, investigators couldn't believe what they found. The following 2 are even more disturbing. As always, viewer discretion is advised. Daniel Forsyth loved the underground, a 41-year-old electrician from Flagstaff, New Mexico. He had been caving recreationally since his early 20s. He wasn't reckless by nature. He wore proper boots, carried extra batteries, and always read up on any system before entering it. By most measures, Daniel was exactly the kind of person who should have been fine. On a Sunday morning in June 2001, he drove out to a lesser-known system called Slaughter Canyon Cave in New Mexico's Carlsbad Caverns backcountry. He signed no entry log. He told his girlfriend he was going hiking. Those 2 decisions would cost him everything. The cave entrance was a steep, sun-baked climb. At the top, it opened like a wound in the hillside, dark and cold against the bright desert morning. He clicked on his headlamp and stepped inside. For the first 2 hours, everything was fine, better than fine. Vast columns of flowstone, passages that folded into each other like a maze of frozen waterfalls. He moved deeper, marking mental notes of each turn. Left at the breakdown pile, right at the double stalactite, straight through the low duct under. Then his headlamp began to dim. He reached into his pack for backup batteries and realized immediately what he had done. He'd grabbed the wrong bag that morning. The fresh batteries were still at home. He swapped in the used ones. The lamp brightened briefly, then faded to a dull orange glow. Daniel turned around. He was going back right now, while he still had some light. That was the right decision. The problem was the cave disagreed. The passage he was certain led to the entrance took him somewhere else entirely. He tried 2 more passages. Neither was right. His lamp faded to almost nothing, and then between one breath and the next, it went out completely. Total darkness underground is not like any darkness you've experienced on the surface. There is no adjustment period. Your eyes do not adapt. There is simply nothing. Daniel stood still for a long moment, breathing hard, forcing himself not to spiral. He was a practical man. He would think his way through this. He had no matches, no signal, but he had a multi-tool. An emergency foil blanket, and 2 protein bars. He ate one immediately, then started moving with his hands on the walls, feeling every surface, building a mental map in the dark. At one point, the passage tightened so sharply, he had to exhale completely just to squeeze through. On the other side, the floor dropped without warning, and he fell. Not far, maybe 4 feet, but he landed badly on his left ankle. He lay still in the dark, breathing through the pain. It wasn't broken, but every step from that point on was agony. He left markers as he moved, tearing strips from his shirt and pressing them into crevices, trying to avoid circling back on himself. He shouted periodically, long slow calls that echoed and died in the rock. No one answered. His girlfriend called that evening. No answer. She assumed he was still hiking and went to sleep. It wasn't until Monday morning, when he hadn't shown up for work, that she called the sheriff's office. A search began, but it focused on the surrounding desert terrain. No one thought to look underground because Daniel had told no one he was going into a cave. It took 2 full days before a park ranger, almost on a hunch, hiked up to the backcountry entrance and shone a flashlight inside. What she saw made her radio for backup immediately. Just inside the threshold was a protein bar wrapper weighted down by a stone. It was placed deliberately. It was a sign. Cave rescue teams entered within hours, and about 300 feet into the second passage network, they found Daniel's torn shirt strips pressed into the rock wall. They followed the trail deeper. They called his name, and this time, faintly, impossibly, from somewhere beneath them, he answered. Daniel Forsyth had been underground for 61 hours. Severely dehydrated, ankle badly swollen, but he was alive. When the rescue team's light finally found his face, he shielded his eyes and said nothing for a long moment. Then he asked what day it was. He had survived by staying methodical when everything in him wanted to panic, but the margin was razor thin. Another 12 hours and the outcome would likely have been different. The cave had kept its secret for nearly 3 days, and Daniel had almost become a permanent part of it. The next story is hard to sit with because it starts with such a small decision. 16-year-old Kayla Merritt and her older brother Josh, 19, had grown up in the kind of household where weekends meant being outside. By the summer of 2004, they were confident, capable, and completely familiar with Petty John's Cave in northwestern Georgia, a popular wild caving destination known for its tight passages and slick flowstone floors. On a Saturday in August, they entered mid-morning with headlamps, gloves, and enough snacks for a half-day trip. It was in the second major chamber that Kayla spotted it. A crack in the far wall, running floor to ceiling, maybe 10 inches wide at its broadest point. On the other side, her headlamp caught a glimmer of calcite formations, crystals that looked like scattered diamonds. Josh shook his head. "Not worth it," he said. Kayla was already measuring it against her shoulders. She angled herself sideways and pushed into the crack. Tight, but manageable. She breathed out, made herself thin, inched forward. The grotto on the other side was spectacular, barely bigger than a closet, completely untouched. She was thrilled. The problem came when she tried to come back. Going in, she had twisted at just the right angle without realizing how specific the angle was. Coming out, she couldn't replicate it. Her right hip caught on a protruding lip of rock. She shifted. The rock held her. She couldn't go forward. She couldn't go back. She was lodged in solid stone 10 inches from her brother, and she could not move. "Josh." Her voice was completely flat. That scared him more than screaming would have. He tried for 10 minutes, working through every possible adjustment, before he accepted what he had to do. He had to leave her and get help. "Don't move," he told her. "I literally can't," she said. Josh ran. By 1:15, he had flagged down hikers with cell signal on the ridge above. Floyd County Search and Rescue received the call at 1:40 p.m. and arrived with a technical rescue team by 3:20. Inside, Kayla had been stuck for over 2 hours. She kept herself calm by talking out loud, narrating her situation to no one, describing the crystals, the sound of distant water below. Later, she said it was the only thing that kept her from losing her mind. The rescue team immediately ruled out sideways extraction. The only option was to rotate her body upward so her hip could clear the ledge holding her. A rescuer climbed to a shelf above the crack and fed a harness loop down. Getting it around her waist in 10 inches of space took 45 minutes of agonizing millimeter by millimeter work. Then they pulled, slowly, with one rescuer guiding her legs below and one managing the line above. Kayla's body began to rotate. She cried out as her hip scraped across the ledge. Up an inch, rotate right, stop, up again. When her hip finally cleared and she came free, the sound she made wasn't a scream or a sob. It was just a long, shaking exhale, like she'd been holding her breath for 3 hours. Because, in a way, she had been. Kayla walked out at 5:55 p.m. with deep bruising across her hip and rib cage and a story she would spend years trying to explain to people who weren't there. Josh didn't say a word on the drive home. 10 inches, that's all it was. 10 inches, and it nearly kept her forever. Stay with me for the last one, because what happened here goes beyond the physical. It gets into territory that's much harder to explain. In September 2003, 20-year-old geology student Mara Voss joined a week-long spelunking course in Lechuguilla Cave, one of the deepest and most complex systems in the United States. On day 5, the group split into teams for a navigation exercise. Her team made a wrong turn early and didn't realize it for 30 minutes. By the time they did, the map in Mara's hands looked like it belonged to a different cave entirely. Her teammates argued about which way to go. Mara voted left, the others went right. She watched them disappear around a corner and made a decision she would think about for the rest of her life. She went left. Within 20 minutes, she was completely alone, completely lost, and her headlamp went dark. She sat down immediately, back against the wall, The way she'd been trained, she would wait. Someone would come. But the cold set in faster than she expected. Lechugia sits at a constant 68 degrees, which sounds mild until you're sitting still on wet stone and wet clothes with no food and no light. Within an hour, she was shivering. Within 2, she was moving again, crawling slowly, running her palms across the floor to feel for drops. Hours passed, or maybe longer. She lost track entirely. That's when the cave started talking to her. It began with sounds, faint and rhythmic, like breathing. Then came shapes, patches of light drifting at the edges of her vision that she knew couldn't be there. She reached toward one and her hand passed through cold air. Then she heard her mother's voice. Not words, just humming, low and steady, coming from somewhere ahead of her. She knew it wasn't real, but it kept her moving forward when every instinct told her to stop. She crawled toward the sound for what felt like another hour. Back on the surface, the search had escalated fast. By nightfall, 12 cavers were moving through the system in coordinated grids. By morning, 31, including 2 specialists flown in from Colorado. Lechugia has over 145 miles of mapped passages. Finding one person with no light was like searching a skyscraper in the dark, floor by floor, with no map of the additions. It was one of the Colorado specialists, Dana Fricks, who finally heard something. She stopped the team and held up her hand. Silence. Then, faintly, rock shifting somewhere below. She pressed her face to a low opening in the passage floor and called out. Mara's voice came back, small and raw and unmistakably real. It took another hour and 40 minutes to reach her, and 90 more to guide her out. When she finally stepped into the lit section of the cave where the rescue team was waiting, she stopped and looked around at all the faces and the lights and said nothing for a very long time. She had been underground, alone, and in total darkness for 39 hours. In the weeks after, Mara could talk about the cold, the thirst, the fear. Those parts made sense. It was the humming she couldn't explain, the sound that pulled her forward toward the right passage, toward the rescuers. She knew what sensory deprivation and hypothermia do to the brain, but she also said this: if it hadn't kept her moving, she would have stopped. And if she'd stopped, she almost certainly would have not survived the cold. The cave gave her something to follow, and somehow, impossibly, it led her toward the light. These 3 caves are still out there. Some are still being mapped. And somewhere in their passages, in every crack and fissure and lightless chamber, the rock is completely indifferent to whether you make it out or not. The only thing standing between you and the dark is preparation, and the decision to tell someone, anyone, exactly where you're going before you step inside.